Hey everyone, so yes, I'm completely 100% serious when I say we'll be scrapping Teslas soon. And all EVs, even nearly new ones like 2 to 3 years old. I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out. The thing is, it's already happening to almost new computers, and it has been for a while. And it's this situation with computers that provides the model for why it would happen to modern electric cars, which are, by the way, as much computers as cars. In the world of Apple devices, for example, institutions dump their Apple products to recyclers by the thousand, and they expect the devices will be destroyed, so they don't bother logging them out, and this causes something called activation lock to be in effect. And so the devices are bricked, completely unusable, and they get scrapped. It doesn't matter if they're only 2 years old, there's nothing that can be done to save them. I've talked about this in other videos. Activation lock is marketed as an anti-theft feature, but these devices are not stolen. The lock is enabled by laziness and apathy, and also the fact that the lock is badly designed. This accounts for millions of perfectly good Apple devices scrapped a year, but barely anyone knows or cares. So with Apple devices, there's that. Stay with me, we'll get back to Teslas soon. But another killer of Apple devices is the fact that the drive, the storage in a computer, is now part of the logic board, the motherboard. Recyclers have strict data destruction rules due to outdated certifications such as NIST, NIST, and R2. In the old days, recyclers could meet the requirements by pulling and shredding removable hard drives, which contained the sensitive data, and then they could sell the computers without the drives for repair and reuse. But today, MacBooks and phones and tablets, they all have the storage built into the board, and it's not removable. So if recyclers want to bother selling almost new computers for reuse or repair, they can't escape doing the data destruction inside the device, because that's where the data is. And rather than just pulling a drive, they're forced to take on the prohibitive cost of complying with certification data destruction requirements, like buying enterprise-level disk wiping and verification systems. It costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time and labor, and most recyclers, small recyclers don't bother or can't justify it because Apple is not their main business. They can't implement some elaborate system for something they only deal with occasionally. So what do? They smash the boards, or they drill holes through them, or they shred the whole computer. Apple started embedding drives into MacBook boards in 2016, and it's really starting to show. Whereas typically by now there would be mountains of those devices available for refurbishing, the vast majority of inventory available today is only up through model year 2015. That's because newer material with embedded storage is not managing to escape the system alive. We'll get to Teslas in just a minute, I promise. But I want to talk about the third major killer of Apple devices, and this is really disgusting. It's that institutions are choosing to pay to have their devices destroyed. They bind recyclers in contracts promising to physically destroy all their devices. Often they're only 2 to 3 years old because the institutions refresh their equipment every 2 to 3 years. It's commonly influenced by ridiculous tax write-off, depreciation, or insurance schemes. Plus, the marketing departments of these institutions like to advertise to customers a quote-unquote zero-tolerance security policy. So they take the extreme measure of physical destruction and not even allowing for reuse. This is alarming. It happens all the time now, and it's not something I saw 10 to 15 years ago, but these days, sadly, it's often the norm. So you can see how these three problems in the Apple electronics world have caused an epidemic of destruction. Tens of millions of perfectly good devices destroyed behind the scenes. Devices with years of life still left in them that should be refurbished and sold to those in need. As a refurbisher myself, I believe this is wrong and it's unethical. Okay, so the moment is here. Now I'll show you how these three problems mean that Teslas and other electric cars will be destroyed in the same way. So when you think about it, most normal people, while they're probably not out there doing anything about these issues, they at least fundamentally have a problem with all this destruction when they see it. But many, specifically a lot of people in the recycling industry, see nothing wrong at all. For example, this recycler. I posted pictures of MacBooks that a recycler had drilled holes through instead of wiping the drives and refurbishing them. The recycler responded that he didn't have a problem with it, that the recycler was just doing its job after all. It's the owner's decision whether to destroy or not to destroy, and he was just helping the owner exercise his property rights. I proposed to him sarcastically that recyclers will scrap Teslas soon by that logic, and this was his response. You might think this is shocking, but what it is shockingly common. People in this industry brainwash themselves into believing any given act of destruction furthers an act of production as a consequence. So by destroying as much as possible, the wheels of progress spin faster. Oh, and it doesn't hurt that the recycler is getting paid. There's that too. When you're getting paid good money to grind up a Tesla, most people will find methods of dealing with the cognitive dissonance. Yeah, according to this recycler, it's such a glorious, beautiful thing, isn't it? No matter that the Tesla or the computer is only a couple years old, no matter that the device took valuable resources to produce that will now be lost, no matter that the device has 10 years of usable life left in it, or that there are hundreds of millions of people in the world who go without and who could use these devices, no matter that it's still a viable product that he could even sell for a profit, for no reason other than being paid for it, really, and high on the delusional notion that all destruction leads to a better future, this recycler would actually scrap a new Tesla. Not even because of a lock or embedded storage, but just because. The logic that leads a person to believe it's okay to destroy a computer is clearly the same logic that leads a person to believe it is okay to destroy anything. So now let's look again at the three main issues that cause the destruction of computers, but this time through the lens of electric cars. Number one, locks that turn computers into bricks. I recommend everyone watch this video by Marques Brownlee about the electric delivery van that Rivian makes for Amazon. It's really fascinating stuff on multiple levels, and what triggered me above all else is that he shows to quote-unquote get started, you must use an app, presumably an Amazon app. Makes sense, yes, but for me, as a refurbisher who thinks all the time about reuse, this instantly prompts the question, what happens when Amazon is done with this van? How is the next user of the van going to use it? Is there some option built into the van to remove this Amazon software to turn it into a normal consumer vehicle? I hope that's the case, although I seriously doubt it's the case. I seriously doubt anyone has gone to the trouble of thinking that far. Most likely these vans will be scrapped, or at least gutted of all electronics, all Amazon proprietary systems and data. I can't say for sure, but I predict that if any of these vans ever escape Amazon ownership, they will be the equivalent of locked and bricked, or otherwise just plain unusable and ready to be scrapped. Now think Tesla, or any EV. All electric cars are computers. Like I said earlier, when institutions dump nearly new computers to recyclers, they fail to wipe them or log them out to provide information that would allow reuse, and they end up bricked. So when, say, government institutions dump EVs to recyclers in the future, I predict that they will dump them without keys, possibly without titles, possibly other information that's required for reuse. It turns out with Teslas, there is an extra security measure that you can implement if you want. You can secure a Tesla with a PIN. And this kind of thing is exactly the type of option that government and law enforcement would choose to do. And in fact, it's government and law enforcement that are most likely to dump their material to recyclers, as they currently do with computers now. So if they have a PIN, I predict they won't turn the PIN over to the recycler. It's not too hard to predict this behavior. And lack of a PIN, I'm told, is extremely hard to overcome. These discarded Teslas will require significant assistance from Tesla, which Tesla may or may not choose to offer, especially without a title or without keys. Sure, there is a state-by-state process to restore a title, and there are processes to get new keys, but it all takes time, it's ridden with roadblocks, and recyclers just don't have that kind of energy and labor hours to invest. If they don't do it for thousands of computers, why would they do it for a car? And this is just a random example of how an EV could get bricked, and there will be many examples and different ones for each manufacturer. So yes, it's completely plausible that recyclers in the future could receive EVs that are locked in a similar manner to activation-locked Apple devices, left for dead by the institution and without necessary elements to make it whole, and therefore problematic to the degree that a recycler would scrap rather than sell for reuse or repair. On to point number 2, removable storage versus storage that is embedded into the board. Electric cars are just computers, and they have drives to store data on. They are increasingly becoming entertainment hubs with apps and all the data you'd have on a phone or a computer. I've already shown that computers get destroyed because drives are now part of the board, and wiping in accordance with certifications is just too much of a burden and an expense. It appears that most, quote, personally identifying information in a Tesla is stored on a removable drive in the glove compartment. And fortunately, it would be easy for a recycler to remove this. But there is additional storage, contact information, account information, on a storage device on the motherboard inside the car that is harder to remove. I've seen conflicting information as to whether this is truly removable or not. It may or may not be. But here's the thing, in the case that storage is in fact on the board, why wouldn't the same data destruction requirements for laptop storage not be applied to cars? And when it is, how is a recycler going to wipe a Tesla in accordance with the outdated NIST certification to satisfy a government customer, or any customer? I predict the same situation as with computers. It's easier to scrap than comply with tedious and expensive data destruction requirements. No, I am not absolutely certain that modern Teslas have embedded unremovable storage devices on their boards that would require NIST-compliant data destruction techniques. But the point is, even if we're not there yet, we're clearly getting there. And if not with Teslas necessarily, then with other manufacturers. As electric cars get cheaper and cheaper and employ cost-cutting measures in order to increase adoption, certainly embedding the data storage on the board, just as computers have, will become one of these measures they take. Tesla gets all the attention all the time, but there are many other EV manufacturers, and Tesla, as a relatively high-quality car, may actually be better than other manufacturers that choose to do this stuff completely sight unseen. Now here's another crazy thought. Even if the car itself has no data inside it, it does have a VIN with a Carfax report, and as a computer, it has additional history and metadata as a node on the network. Plus, there may be history of the car known by apps that have been used on the car, or the auto manufacturers may have histories as well, similar to how Apple has an elaborate history of every single one of its serial numbers in its system for perpetuity. An institution, particularly a government institution, may not wish to have a car once associated with it now associated with someone else, and that could easily push the car towards destruction rather than reuse. I can hear everyone screaming, but John, in a Tesla, like any device, you can do a factory reset. And that's true, but the thing is, as we've seen on the computer side, while an Apple MacBook, for example, does a factory reset that deletes the keys on an encrypted volume and effectively makes data impossible to recover, certifications generally do not allow a manufacturer's factory reset process to count as a secure wipe. As I've stated, third-party enterprise tools are required, which are expensive and laborious and a lot of recyclers don't bother with, so the requirement pushes the computers towards a recycler's easy way out, which is scrapping, destruction. There's no reason I can see that sensitive data in embedded storage on cars will not have the same data destruction requirements, which prompts the question, how do you comply with certification requirements on cars? That requirement is going to present the same complications as with computers, and cars are going to get scrapped for the same reason as computers. Finally, we're on to problem number 3, the idea that institutions and recyclers don't even need a reason to scrap any given thing, and that institutions will pay recyclers just to shut up and scrap it. Our Tesla scrapping friend who runs a recycler has already told us this. Again, he's drunk on the idea that all destruction helps spin the wheels of progress even faster. It's worth noting that cars are generally not dealt with by electronics recyclers. Car scrappers are a different breed, and that's often because they have different equipment and they deal with things like gasoline and oil and toxic substances from cars that are not the same set of toxic materials that electronics recyclers deal with. However, I predict that soon there will be much more overlap with electronics recyclers when it comes to EVs. Recyclers deal with batteries, glass, steel, and of course electronics and PCBs, so it makes sense that at least a chunk of cars would get gutted and moved under their umbrella. And if they're under that umbrella, they will certainly be subject to the same requirements and certifications. And as our friend illustrated, if he gets paid, he'll do it. So I don't see any pushback from the industry in regard to cars, just as there is virtually no industry pushback to stop shredding 3-year-old computers as they're currently doing. So in conclusion, number 1, cars are computers. Millions of perfectly good, nearly new computers are discarded by institutions for all kinds of ridiculous reasons, and it's well known that institutions also cycle through cars on a similar time frame. Number 2, The computers that are discarded are handed over carelessly, unwiped, and locked, with embedded drives that take more effort than is worth to comply with the outdated certifications, and they get scrapped. Similarly, EVs, as computers that increasingly contain sensitive data and embedded storage, are devices that will absolutely get scrapped for the same reasons and by the same logic. And finally, number three, the recycling industry has proven itself perfectly able to destroy millions of good computers with little or no attention being drawn to it, and it has shown no moral aversion to doing what it does. Our recycler friend illuminates the fact that he has no problem using an extension of the same thinking to accommodate the scrapping of electric cars. Pay him and he'll do whatever anyone wants, and he'll delude himself into thinking he's saving the world. Yes, I know. This is not all quite happening yet. But what I'm trying to say, above all else, is we will get there. And by the logic, technologies, and processes we have already accepted that destroy millions of perfectly good computers, we will not even blink when it comes to cars. Far more powerful than any environmental empathy we may pretend to have as Americans or citizens of Earth is our compulsion to buy what is the latest and greatest. The second that meaningful environmental activism requires us to experience even the slightest inconvenience, we as a society will clearly toss that nagging voice over our shoulder and buy the next big thing, only ever looking forward and disregarding at all cost the mountain of waste and destruction left behind us. So do I think we'll grind up Teslas into dust after 3 years of use? Hell yeah, of course I do. The evidence is clearly there. You and all of us, by our very actions, have already bought into our friend the recycler's absurd notion that destruction equals creation. His dirty deeds, behind the scenes, out of our view, are really nothing but a natural consequence of the actions we've all taken. At the end of the day, let's face it, we're happy he's doing the dirty work for us. He's our henchman hiding the corpses, out of sight so we don't have to see them, patting us on the head and easing our nerves with his greenwashing propaganda. The question is not whether we'll destroy EVs. That's completely obvious. The question is, will we ever manage to care? Will we ever end our addiction to consumption to the point where we bother to look in the rearview mirror? I fear that by the time we do look back, it won't be because we care. It will be because our society is driven straight into a wall, and we'll look back because we have no future left. Thanks for watching.